I want to share the case history of a young patient I'm working with right now who's dealing with a classic textbook case of PANDAS. Now, PANDAS and PANDAS, which are essentially the same thing, it's just one has a specific pathogen that drives it, are more common than people would think. So what it stands for is Pediatric, essentially Neuropsychiatric syndrome, and then that's PANDAS. It means that at some stage a child gets infected with a specific bacteria or some kind of pathogen that leads to these neurological changes. PANDAS is the same thing, but it's when they know that it specifically followed strep. So for all intent and purposes, they're essentially the same thing. And so a team member of mine, their 10-year-old daughter, a few years ago started showing the early signs of classic PANDAS, and it came from a really obvious way to be infected looking back. So in hindsight, when we look back at when a lot of her symptoms started, which I'll cover in a minute, it all seemed to happen after some dental work. Now, we know that when you're having work on your gums and your teeth, it's a really easy portal of infection. It's one of the most common ways people get nasty infections in their body because we get that open line straight to our bloodstream. So a little while after some dental work, as the parents have traced it back, is when a lot of this stuff started. And so what's going on with this young girl? So she's developed a lot of OCD style traits. It can be a real bear to get her out of the house in the morning because her shoes have got to be put on the right way. But then she's also got sensory abnormalities where if they don't feel right on her, then she's going to freak out and not want to wear them. Basically what's happening in this case is the immune system and the nervous system are so overloaded, we get this huge autoimmune response that everything gets so oversensitive. It's like being sunburned. If you pat someone on the shoulder like that, it wouldn't hurt, but if they're blistered and sunburned, that's way too much. It's like, oh, please don't touch me. Well, that's what's happening internally with their immune system and nervous system. So any sensory that's off, they're just not going to do well with it at all. The OCD kicks in, which in my opinion probably is happening when brains are inflamed, and it's giving a child some kind of control of their environment when they feel out of control inside. She started getting some little bit of sleeping issues, although not too bad for her. Very, very picky with eating. Not so much major outbursts, although that can happen, but definitely outbursts in a way that it just interrupts the whole family if they're trying to get out on a certain time to get everyone to school, and it interrupts the other siblings. And it's so hard to watch because you feel so bad for the child who's going through this because they're not meaning to have this reaction. And they're not meaning to develop this crippling anxiety and everything else that goes with it. But then it has this toll on the parents and the other siblings. Now, the good news is we've recognized what's going on, and there's going to be ways to be able to help. So where do we start? Well, I always start with an OAT test, an organic acids test, which is a urine test, to have a look at what's being broken down in her urine. Has she got some kind of C. diff or gut bacterial infection, or is there candida? We also want to test for some other pathogens like strep and things like that. Now, at that age, and especially a child dealing with that, you're not going to get probably a blood draw unless you pin them down and traumatize them. So we're starting with just urine. We're doing the OAT, and we're doing a total tox panel where we look at mold mycotoxins, heavy metals, and environmental chemicals. Why are we doing that? Well, I want to see if the immune system was already weakened because of some mold exposure, and just because of some other earlier on symptoms that had gone on as a child that didn't really relate to PANDAS, but maybe give an indication of some mold issues. We want to see if that's there, because we also know mold's probably going to bring about fungus and candida and other things like that. And 2 urine tests are easy enough for this child to do at the age of 10, where we're not traumatizing her with blood work. Now, how those results come back will drive treatment. But almost certainly what we're going to have to do is get her on some supplement protocols to help open drainage pathways. It would be ideal if we could also get her in for a little bit of lymphatic drainage, but we're just going to start at home with the family doing some dry brushing on her, getting her just a short exposure into some infrared sauna would be great, anything to sweat. But the supplement protocol we'll put her on is going to support the liver and the gallbladder and the kidneys and the adrenals and the bowels, because we've got to start getting some toxins out. Those toxins can be living or non-living, but whatever infection triggered this thing, again, it's of my opinion that you're not going to be perfectly healthy or as close to perfect as you can be, get exposed to a pathogen, and then boom, you have PANDAS overnight. I think it's an overload where your cup was full that final pathogen came in and that's what spilled out over the top. So we know that she's probably not detoxing well. It's also not a bad idea if we need to down the road to do a little MTHFR test and see if those genetics are at play there. Remember, genetics don't mean that you're going to have poor health, but they do load the gun that lifestyle then pulls the trigger. So we want to address that. And then we'll probably move on to first step after the drainage protocol pathway will probably be taking out parasites. I'm expecting there to be gut bacteria that come up in the results, so we'll deal with that as well. If there's mold or yeast or candida or anything like that, then we'll do some antifungal stuff too, some tinctures mainly. And then we're just going to work through each of the things and help her body get rid of toxins and get rid of these pathogens. And I would expect over the space of 6 to 12 months, a giant change in her behavioral tendencies. The eating should get better, the OCD and the sensory abnormalities should start to go away. And really within 2 to 3 years, because she's otherwise pretty healthy, it's not the most severe case of PANS or PANDAS I've ever seen. It's not impairing cognitive ability or anything like that. And I just think at her age and otherwise health, I think within 2 to 3 years she'll be hopefully fully recovered. And so it doesn't have to be a lifelong sentence, but as a parent, you've also got to ask more questions. If your child has developed some of these tendencies like OCD or even ADHD or anything that's come on that wasn't always kind of there in the early years, you've got to look at that and ask the questions of what may have caused that. And if you can trace a lot of it back to an obvious time where the child was sick with strep or they had dental work or some obvious infective time, then there's a very possible chance that they are dealing with the PANS or PANDAS. So I'll do another video in a few months and update on where she is at with her progress as we start treatment. But if you've got questions about this, either a kiddo of yours or a grandkid or just maybe a close family member or friend, and you think they might be dealing with something like this, leave a comment below and let me help you try and fill in the pieces that are missing to work out if it's a possibility and what testing you should do. Of course, if you've also made it this far, then I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button because I don't want you to miss the further videos that I'll be doing on PANS and PANDAS.